What's poppin', folks? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So most of us are familiar with a little policy called affirmative action. It was introduced back in the civil rights era to ensure minorities have access to an equal playing field. Well, yesterday, the Supreme Court upheld Michigan's ban on that policy. The court decided in a 6-2 ruling that Michigan's constitutional change outlawing public universities from considering race in the admissions process was legal. Interestingly, all the male justices voted in favor of the affirmative action ban. But Justice Sonia Sotomayor voted no and wrote a dissent longer than all the concurring arguments combined. This should come as no surprise, considering that she herself has stated that she owes some of her success to the implementation of affirmative action. And the numbers don't lie. According to USA Today, since the ban in Michigan has taken effect, African American enrollment dropped 33% at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, even as overall enrollment grew by 10%. But Michigan is not even the most disproportionate state when it comes to the issue. A ban on affirmative action in California has been in effect since 1996, and the results have been stunning. Watch UCLA student Cy Stokes break it down.
In fall 2012, the total enrollment, graduate and undergraduate, for African American males at UCLA was 660 students. That's 3.3% of the 19,838 other males enrolled here. Out of that 660 African American male students, 65% are undergraduate athletes.
Wow. So now that the Supreme Court has set this dangerous precedent, it may mean that more American universities will return to the same old discriminatory policies that have set back minorities for generations. Because in a nation where white males comprise 67% of Congress, if you're a minority, then your sheer existence is a threat to the status quo. So maybe we shouldn't be too shocked the highest court in the land wants to preserve the old ways of institutionalized privilege. Now let's break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
Once again, to put something on the air, it's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait, do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do, because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire and tone. These words are hard hitting, you're watching your neck, but you need to tune in, cause we're breaking the set. Breaking the set. Breaking the set.
Infrastructure allows society to function and is the backbone of any industrialized country. Here in America, it's easy to take for granted access to water, electricity, gas, and paved roads. But over the last few decades, it's become apparent that U.S. infrastructure is crumbling as it faces unprecedented environmental and man-made challenges. One needs to look no further than 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, destroying the protective levees in its path. And even though the hurricane was large, it was only a Category 3 storm when it hit, and should have not caused the levees to collapse like they did. Of course, what transpired next is well documented and nothing short of a devastating tragedy, leading to $108 billion worth of damage and over 1,800 people dead, mostly in the poorest areas of the city. But this disaster could have been easily prevented. See, according to the Army Corps of Engineers' own reports, the agency foresaw the failure of these levees all the way back in the 80s. But it's not just levees guarding coastal cities that are in need of massive upgrades. It's also bridges, as evidenced by the 2007 Mississippi River Bridge collapse in Minneapolis that resulted in the deaths of 13 people and injured dozens more. This, too, could have been averted, seeing as how the National Transportation Safety Board determined that the construction company that created the bridge failed to adequately review its design and safety. Or fast forward to 2010, when a massive gas pipeline exploded in San Bruno, California, because of the failure by gas company Pacific Gas and Electric to perform proper maintenance and adequate review of the corroding pipeline. Just this month, the company was charged with criminal negligence for its purposeful neglect and inaccurate record keeping. But all of these stories paint a larger picture of a country in dire need of repair. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, 42% of America's urban highways are congested and crumbling. 1 in 9 of the nation's bridges are structurally deficient, and over 240,000 water mains break every year. Overall, the ASCE gives U.S. infrastructure a D+, just barely above failing, and estimates that it will cost $3.6 trillion for necessary infrastructure investment by 2020. So, of course, Washington's jumping on board to fund these infrastructure projects that could potentially create thousands of jobs, right? Well, not exactly. In fact, thanks to austerity measures, infrastructure spending has plummeted over $60 billion in the last 12 years to just around $225 billion. Now, while that may sound like a huge number to you, considering that the U.S. has spent $4 to $6 trillion blowing up and rebuilding Iraq and Afghanistan, according to a Harvard study, the number suddenly doesn't seem so massive. And it's really just priorities of how the richest nation on earth chooses to spend its money. So with such an important topic largely forgotten about in the mainstream, my next guest is delving into the issue with a crowd-funded documentary project called Build. Check it out.
It seems that we've decided that building wealth is more important than building. Over the course of a 2-week road trip from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., I will be documenting and researching 2 of the most important and struggling facets of our infrastructure problems: roads and water. Through my experience in news, entertainment, and new media, I plan to make this transmedia experiment, which will include essays, photographs, documentary footage, and much more, in order to expand people's minds and get them to ask the question, where is the $3.6 trillion needed to repair the most dangerous of our infrastructure problems coming from? What kind of country do we want to live in? And who's going to fight for it?
So to discuss America's near failing grade when it comes to infrastructure and who's going to fight for this country, I'm joined now by journalist, producer Tabitha Wallace. Thank you so much for coming on, Tabitha.
Thank you so much.
What is up?
Having me.
So you're going on this 2-week road trip. You're going to be documenting all this stuff. Really amazing project here. Where are you planning to go, and what are you hoping to achieve with the documentary?
Well, the first phase 1 is primarily on this trip is Texas, Louisiana, obviously talking about New Orleans, and West Virginia. Talking about water, roads, bridges, dams, those kind of things. Meeting people and really getting more citizen journalists who are on the ground. As Jesse Ventura would say, it's getting boots on the ground. And I'll put my boots on the ground and find people who also can push things through.
Yeah, and just getting people to engage with the subject, because it really isn't talked about as much as it should be.
No, it's not sexy. It's not a sexy topic.
Right.
So talking about roads and bridges, but when you realize that 1 in 9 bridges is deficient, just think about how many bridges you drive on a daily basis, and you think about it. And what happened in Minnesota was tragic, and it could have been prevented simply by proper oversight.
Right, it is really a horrifying statistic, and to think about, even though it isn't sexy, it's crucial. I'd say it's one of the most crucial things that we need to address. Tabitha, what infrastructure areas do you see are in the most peril? Would you say it's bridges?
I would say roads and bridges and water are those main ones. With dams, you have a connection to the electrical grid, which is also there. But roads get us from point A to point B. Roads get us our products from point A to point B. And if they're not sufficient and they're not working, it raises the price of everything else, which means companies don't have as much money to put toward jobs and growth. So it all ends up sort of coming together. I would say roads initially are the very first important thing, aside from right after sort of these very dangerous situations with bridges and dams.
I find it so fascinating how much federal money is pumped into somewhere like Washington, D.C. or other main metropolitan areas, Tabitha, but then you see just the roads are just completely collapsing, even though there's high-rises built in 24 hours.
Like, because spending $200, $300 million on some nice apartments makes sense, and putting in a whole bunch of infrastructure under that building, which every city does, is okay. They'll put $1 million into new pipes for a luxury building, but the idea of fixing potholes or fixing the water supply or making any of it more efficient for all of us is ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. There's a streetcar back in the east on 8th Street here in D.C. I think people who live around the area will know, and it's been sitting there for basically 2 years. And it could bring people into the city, but of course it's the poor area. The rich people in D.C. don't really care. What are the primary reasons, though, for this drastic drop in funding? I mean, over the last 12 years?
Mainly politics. It really is as sad as that, and everything that I found out, and part of this project is finding out more and really talking to politicians, because we've been pushing toward war, and you can scare people with you know, a foreign country, you can scare people with a whole bunch of buzzwords, but it's harder to scare people with potholes. It's you know.
Even though car crashes, I mean, we were talking about car accidents. I mean, that's like the #1 killer.
Yeah, and it's political. I mean, you look at Obama, who ran on this idea of updating all of this infrastructure. It was the reason I voted for him the first time, and a reason myself and a lot of other people maybe didn't the second, because he said he was going to do all of this. And congressmen and senators all ran on this idea of we're going to rebuild America. They haven't built anything. Nothing's getting built, and you have soldiers coming home, and you have people without jobs, and this is the perfect New Deal opportunity to rebuild America and stimulate the economy. And it seems weird that nobody's doing it.
It almost makes me sad, because I can see something so amazing happening if those jobs were put here on the ground, the boots on the ground, to get this infrastructure up and running and to stop basing America on a war economy, because really that's what it is. Let's talk about this horrific grade given to America by the American Society of Civil Engineers. What are some of the solutions here to improve public transportation? And are there any model cities that you think you can point to in America that are doing it right?
I mean, for the most part, when you look at Washington, D.C. Central, you sort of have, it seems pretty well set together. But as you said, it's so easy to find crumbling problems in every city. You can look at, you know, New York has a pretty efficient subway and public transportation system, but they're really falling behind in everything from water to that. I mean, Madison, Wisconsin, I will say, as it's my home state, I will say that I know that that's actually probably one of the better ones. They seem to really put the money into it and the thought.
I know in San Diego, living in San Diego and San Francisco, the public transportation is almost non-existent. You almost have to take the bus. The trolley doesn't even go to the beach because, of course, the white people there originally said we don't want the kind of the poorer communities to come in. Same with San Francisco. The BART doesn't go to the city late at night. It's outrageous. It really, really is.
And then people have to have cars, which puts all of this, you know, stress on the economy, because these people can't afford to have a car. You're paying all your money that you work to pay for a car and gasoline and everything else. But that's part of it.
I think
don't get public transportation, because keep them on oil.
People in European countries would say that we are crazy for doing what we do. Building the cities with freeways around these pockets of city where you have to take freeways from one point to another. What is it going to take? Because if Congress is so obsessed with war and politics and getting reelected, how are we going to convince politicians, hey, fund what's important?
I think people, part of the further down phases of my project is having a website and having a place where people can go and find out in your community, down to your municipality, who's responsible for your water, who's responsible for your solid waste, your roads, everything, and for business owners as well. And people need to come together. They need to come together and vote correctly in what they need, and business owners need to push both federal and state and municipal governments for the things that will help them build their business and grow the economy, which is what we need. It's not tax breaks.
And you have 3 phases of the project. Phase 2 and 3 is actually going to be what you're talking about, giving citizens the direct tools that they can really directly change. We also have places in Colorado that are actually public takeovers of their utility companies, different things that can happen. Thank you so much. Can you give us a quick shout out to the Indiegogo campaign where people can help support?
Yes, it's called Build, and you can find it on Indiegogo under Build. Look under Tabitha Wallace. You can also see it on Twitter. Decoy Tabitha is mine, and then on Facebook. And contact me and I'll let you know.
Awesome to have you on, Tabitha. Thanks so much. Coming up, you guys, I'll talk about how the NYPD Twitter campaign backfired hardcore.
I'm the resident, and I'm sick of society sucking. I'm sick of corporations trying to convince us to consume. I'm sick of bankers trying to convince us all that life is all about money. And I'm especially sick of our politicians writing the laws and regulations to protect corporations and bankers while they hang us out to dry. There is just too much crap in today's society. Let's talk about that.
Perhaps the greatest thing about Twitter is that it allows everyday people to personally interact with celebrities and massive corporations. Think about it. When in the past could you directly insult TV personalities like me right after watching this show? Well, numerous organizations have learned about the benefits of this feature firsthand, being able to answer followers' questions and retweet consumer compliments. But then there's times where social media campaigns launched by corporate America have enormously backfired. In 2012, for example, when McDonald's asked users to tweet out their best dining experiences at the restaurant using the hashtag McDStories, well, to the surprise of no one, the stories weren't exactly what Mr. Ronald McDonald was looking for. One person tweeted out, "My memories of walking into a McDonald's, the sensory experience of inhaling deeply from a freshly opened can of dog food." Another tweet read, "I just read that McDonald's chicken nuggets have a foaming agent in them, similar to products used for building materials. Gross." But not to be outdone by the golden arches, financial giant JP Morgan decided to try its hand at interacting with its consumers. Last year, the banking behemoth tweeted out that its vice chairman would be doing a live Twitter Q&A and that users should send out questions using the hashtag AskJP. Well, the Twitter world sure did have a lot of questions for good old JP. One user asked, "When will you all go to jail?" Great question. Another asked, what's it like working with Mexican drug cartels? Do they tip? And best of all, another tweeter joked, "Where do I send my resume? I'm smart and have very flexible morals." Unsurprisingly, JP Morgan ended up canceling this exciting Q&A opportunity. And maybe these debacles will make the corporations most responsible for destroying the economy and the planet think twice before they open it up for public feedback. But as hilarious as these tweets are, the New York Police Department's social media campaign takes the Twitter fail cake. That's right. In an attempt to show just how much the community loves the NYPD, the department took to Twitter to invite New Yorkers to share happy photos with members of the police force. And what do you know? Citizens across the city tweeted their photos of NYPD officers lauding some of their most appreciated services, such as transportation. Occupy Wall Street's Twitter account talked about the free delivery given to Occupy activists by the Boys in Blue during the height of the movement. Or free mammograms. Yes, as user Guru 0509 tweeted out, 3 officers manhandling a screaming woman. Or free chiropractor services, like this man getting his spine aligned on the hood of a car by 3 riot cops. And last but not least, street cleaning, like this man whose body was used to clean up the peace signs chalked onto the sidewalk around him. Yes, the photos range from erroneous police shootings into civilian crowds to indiscriminate arrests of peaceful protesters. And I don't know what's more ridiculous here. The fact that this campaign backfired so quickly, or that the NYPD thought Twitter users would have a bunch of positive police stories to tell. Because in a city that carried out one of the most brutal crackdowns on the Occupy movement, there ain't too many glowing compliments to give. So let this be a lesson to all the corporate and government institutions that expect Twitter to give them praise. Because as much as they try to silence the people that are the victims of their disastrous policies, unfortunately on Twitter, no one can escape the unwashed masses. Last week, the very first 9/11 trial hearing of the year was suddenly put on hold by a military judge at the Guantanamo Bay prison. The reason for the postponement was an alleged conflict of interest regarding a potential FBI mole within the defense team of one of the Gitmo detainees. And the Associated Press reported today the delay on 9/11 trials could be further complicated by the U.S. Senate report on CIA torture methods. It's been over 12 years since Gitmo opened, yet many of the prisoners have yet to have their day in court. And while many have already been cleared for release years ago, that doesn't mean they'll ever be free. In fact, legal uncertainties looming over the delayed military tribunals could keep these men detained forever. So here to discuss the most recent updates on the absurd secrecy that's come to define Guantanamo Bay, I'm joined by U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander and JAG Attorney Kevin Bukaki. Thank you so much for coming on, Kevin.
Thank you, Abby.
Good to have you on again. So, Kevin, we know that there are individuals who are cleared for release, not deemed a threat by not deemed a national security threat by the establishment. You are representing different people. You're representing people who could potentially be guilty. Why have you chosen to represent potentially the most dangerous inmates at Gitmo?
Abby, let me start by saying that
it is one of the most fundamental pillars of American justice, that when anyone is accused of a serious crime, they're entitled to be represented by competent counsel. But it goes far beyond that. In my estimation, opposing the absurd and un-American system that exists at Guantanamo is really the most patriotic thing that I've done in my military career.
I really like that answer. Your defense, this is where it gets very interesting. Your defense team has said that in at least one instance, 2 FBI agents enlisted a civilian on your client's defense team as a confidential informant. What happened here? Can you break down what's going on?
Abby, as if the military commission system weren't already bad enough. Last week, as Esquire magazine observed, the FBI came bumbling in like a drunk on a bender. After church on Sunday, they approached a critical member of our defense team, the defense team representing Ramzi bin al-Sheba in what's been called the crime of the century, the trial of the century. They showed up at his house after church, and not only did they ask him questions, much more significantly, they had him sign an agreement establishing a relationship between this member of Ramzi's defense team and the FBI, and imposing upon him a duty of confidentiality with the FBI. Well, this critical member of our defense team already was within the attorney-client privilege and had a duty of confidentiality to our client, to Ramzi, to Mr. bin al-Sheba. So by creating this conflicting duty of loyalty, the FBI not only deprived us of this very valuable member of our defense team, but by now exposing that, in fact, the defense counsel in this case are under investigation, they've potentially created a conflict of interest where defense attorneys are now worried more about ourselves than we are about our clients, which I can tell you cannot happen. And I will not allow it to happen. Before I came on today, Abby, I had to consider carefully what I was going to say, and I realized that if I was going to allow this investigation to intimidate me into saying things or doing things differently than I otherwise would have in the representation of my client, then I am facilitating exactly the conflict of interest we were afraid this investigation would create.
Well, of course, the FBI is trying to create this chilling effect, trying to kind of deter the investigation even more, Kevin. We've seen so many roadblocks with whether it be the CIA report that the Senate's trying to release, or the stalling on the periodic review boards, or this stalling and trying to set back. Why is it so difficult, and what is this new revelation gonna do?
Abby, nothing has happened in the 9/11 case since December of last year. And the prosecution has a mantra. They like to say that the defense's strategy is delay, delay, delay. But the reason that nothing has happened for almost 5 months has been exclusively on the government. In December, the government demanded a competency hearing for our client that was completely unnecessary, and that the judge ultimately decided was completely unnecessary. That resulted in a postponement of the February hearings. And then we showed up in April to finally litigate this alleged lack of competency on the part of my client, which we've never alleged as the defense. And instead of being able to litigate this very important issue, instead we find out that the FBI has really thrust a terrible conflict into our defense team that maybe risks setting the 9/11 trials back to square one with brand new counsel.
Unbelievable, Kevin. And when we hear prisoners have been released, we've heard a couple instances of prisoners who've been released from Gitmo. It doesn't really mean that they're free. It just means that they're being transferred to another prison. What is it going to take for the Yemeni government and the U.S. government's relationship to allow these prisoners to actually be put back into their home country of Yemen, the people who are already cleared for release, free, innocent?
The idea that we continue to hold people without any basis for holding them simply because we're not comfortable with the United States political relationship with their home country is yet another absurdity. And just when you think that Guantanamo can't get any more absurd, it rises to new heights, as we saw last week. Let me, if I could, just give you one more example. The reason that the government challenged my client's competency to stand trial was because he had consistently complained of ongoing abuse by exposure to sounds and vibrations at the camp where they hold him. And the government said, well, those things can't be happening, so he must be crazy. What we have consistently found out over the course of preparing for that hearing is that he's not crazy at all. In fact, what we found is that his allegations are entirely substantiated. Just last week, the prosecutor disclosed that one of Ramsey's wildest, seemingly wildest allegations, which was that they were playing bird noises over the external speakers at a deafening volume at the camp. I mean, an allegation that even I had a hard time believing. The prosecutor came to me and acknowledged that, in fact, they were doing that at the camp, purportedly so that detainees couldn't overhear guard conversations.
And let's talk about Camp 7, because this is another new revelation, at least in my mind, that there's this other kind of more hidden camp that the worst of the worst detainees are put, that actually this torture does take place. Can you talk about what else goes on at that camp?
Abby, this camp is so secret that even I, representing my client, along with the rest of his defense team, none of us have even been able to see this place. We've been completely kept away, despite our requests to go there. And we're being required to litigate critical issues related to this camp. As I said, the noises and the vibrations, the conditions of confinement, all of these things we have to litigate without even being able to go there. I hold a top secret SCI security clearance, really the highest security clearance you can have, but they don't trust me to go to this camp. That's how secret it is. And let me say one thing, Abby, because this also relates to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence report. I've carefully read the executive order that governs what can be properly classified. And protecting the government or individuals against embarrassment is not a legitimate basis for classifying information. So if the United States has in fact moved away from these methods that we never should have used in the first place, what intelligence is going to be divulged? It is just a matter of trying to protect people from embarrassment, and that is not acceptable.
And you just hit it right on the head right there. National security is used to really just cover up a lot of embarrassment, a lot of failure, and it's time to close this torture prison once and for all. Kevin Bogucki, sorry for getting your name wrong before, Navy Lieutenant Commander, Guantanamo defense attorney. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
That's our show, you guys. Join me again tomorrow when I break the set all over again. Who's shocked the highest court in the land wants to preserve the old ways of institutionalized privilege? Now let's break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, to put something on the air, it's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait, do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do, because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw.
Than all the concurring arguments combined. This should come as no surprise, considering that she herself has stated that she owes some of her success to the implementation of affirmative action. And the numbers don't lie. According to USA Today, since the ban in Michigan has taken effect, African American enrollment dropped 33% at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, even as overall enrollment grew by 10%. But Michigan is not even the most disproportionate state when it comes to the issue. A ban on affirmative action in California has been in effect since 1996, and the results have been stunning. Watch UCLA student Cy Stokes break it down.
In fall 2012, the total enrollment, graduate and undergraduate, for African American males at UCLA was 660 students. That's 3.3% of the 19,838 other males enrolled here. Out of that 660 African American male students, 65% are undergraduate athletes.
Wow. So now that the Supreme Court has set this dangerous precedent, it may mean that more American universities will return to the same old discriminatory policies that have set back minorities for generations. Because in a nation where white males comprise 67% of Congress, if you're a minority, then your sheer existence is a threat to the status quo. So maybe we shouldn't be too... What's poppin', folks? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So most of us are familiar with a little policy called affirmative action. It was introduced back in the civil rights era to ensure minorities have access to an equal playing field. Well, yesterday, the Supreme Court upheld Michigan's ban on that policy. The court decided in a 6-2 ruling that Michigan's constitutional change outlawing public universities from considering race in the admissions process was legal. Interestingly, all the male justices voted in favor of the affirmative action ban. But Justice Sonia Sotomayor voted no and wrote a dissent along. Infrastructure allows society to function and is the backbone of any industrialized country. Here in America, it's easy to take for granted access to water, electricity, gas, and paved roads. But over the last few decades, it's become apparent that U.S. infrastructure is crumbling as it faces unprecedented environmental and man-made challenges. One needs to look no further than 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, destroying the protective levees in its path. And even though the